Welcome to the Thriving Leadership Academy podcast. I'm Christopher Harding, about to be joined by my business partner, Will Wilkinson, and our guest, Mark Silver, small business consultant and author of the book, Heart-Centered Business, now available on Amazon. So excited for you to join us in this conversation. It is really rich, and I think you're going to learn some things and have some insights that will really serve you well.
First off, hats off to you for the heavy lifting that's required to enter the business world the way you are, emphasizing love and authenticity and so forth. You know, we do that too, and it's not the easiest route. I think it's the most necessary one. So for today, we thought, why not just go with that? Like, instead of rehearsing what's wrong and, you know, all the things we need to correct, let's just create a vision, you know, even for our podcast about what it is people can do, because your book is extremely practical, which is a terrific part of it. Here's what to do. So that's what Chris and I were discussing. Let's just have a positive experience together of a business experience where love is a priority. How about that?
I love it. I love it. Let's get in. Yeah. And I'm just really honored, and I just want to acknowledge, like, I'm just touched by your words. You know, the book was well, I mean, you all know it's a thing, and to have it received with the kind of words you're sharing with me, I'm just really touched. So thank you.
No, you're welcome. You're welcome. I also love that your focus, you know, I think what you've written is applicable for anybody in any company of any size, quite honestly. But your focus is on kind of the entrepreneur, the micro business or the small business, which don't get a lot of attention sometimes. A lot of the training and leadership development is at that larger level. And so, you know, it's you've got clients that you've apparently had for some time in this realm, and I'd love to just hear what inspired you to focus on love in business. I get it as a spiritual practice, but not everybody gets the crossover into business and why that would work.
I grew up in business. My parents ran a store that my grandfather had started. He was a pharmacist. He sold alcohol by prescription during Prohibition, and then went into the wine business. And then I just started to see, so anyway, the corporate world, when I kind of got caught up in activism and in the punk scene, there was so much terrible stuff, which well documented. We could talk about that for a long time. We don't need to. Really. And I got very turned off of business. And but then I began to see that so many of my friends and people that I knew were ending up self-employed or with small businesses because there's no jobs like what they wanted to do. Like, they had a vision for how they wanted to be in the world and what they wanted to do and where they wanted to bring their gifts. And so they had to create their own work. And it was very beautiful to see that, but then engaging with the marketplace in an effective way was really hard. And so when I entered into the world of Sufi healing, I'm collapsing a lot of stories along the way here. I studied with this Palestinian sheikh, Sidi al-Jamal, called him Sidi affectionately, and he had students all over the world, and he passed in 2015, but studied with him for a long time. And some of the people he appointed teachers before I became a teacher here in North America. And the practice, I think, of most spiritual paths, but certainly of Sufism, is how do we see the divine, God, love? How do we find it in everything? Not how do we bring it in? It's already there, but it gets obscured, it gets twisted. And because I was already functioning in the world of business at that point, that's where I was starting to look. Like, is there love available even here, is one of the questions that I have our clients ask, and that I ask most frequently, because we run into these situations where I don't see the love. I don't see any love here. And I start to ask, is love available even here? And that opens up a curiosity about how that can be there. And invariably, I find it. Um, and I don't know if life is worth living without love. And
Mm,
because work and business is kind of, a major part of our life, it seems to be, it's such a major part of our life, and yet it's the realm that has tried to exempt itself from that pursuit, in family, in relationships, in community, in, everything. It seems like love and care and good relationships and heart connections are just kind of a given. But this idea that professionalism and business needs to be cold, impersonal, transactional,
Mm.
I think has been um, a myth. It's been this lie that we've been sold, and I think there's been a great deal of harm that's grown out of that myth. And so that was really the impulse. Like, if we're going to be in business, if we're going to do that kind of work, there has to be love. There has to be that connection, or I can't, I can't take it. Like I can't do it. Others can't do it.
Well, Mark,
We're yeah.
you met that head on right in the little video that's on your website, where you said every act of business is an act of love. And I thought, what a bold statement. I mean, I agree with it, but I wanted to ask you, how does that go over? Because, man, you're putting your cards right on the table. And I
Yeah.
love it. I love it. But wow, what an entree. So, what kind of response do you get from that?
Well, I'll tell you, this is also a marketing lesson. Is that when you are very clearly who you are, people self-select. So, by and large, I've gotten extremely positive reaction because people have been thirsty the same way that I've been thirsty. Our hearts have been so thirsty for this. And thank God I'm not the only person doing this. Like, there's, people, this is something that's been growing and growing. But love is something that we're all thirsty for. And so those who are most aware of it are the ones who come. And it's, and I've had private conversations with CEOs and with entrepreneurs, and they're all so relieved. And they're also stunned at how these kinds of insights affect the personal life. It's like there's this artificial line between our personal lives and our business lives. And corporations are trying to erase that in an unhealthy way, saying you're going to work 24 hours a day. And thank God there's been a lot of pushback against that and resistance against that because it's inhuman. But on the other side of that, we have to be ourselves. Like, we shouldn't have to be a different person in different realms. The way of a healthy relationship in my family is the same principles of a healthy relationship at work, and or in business, or with clients, or with colleagues. And so these insights translate very powerfully across that realm. So I just,
yeah.
yeah.
No, that makes total sense. I mean, we're all preaching to the choir here because we've seen the same thing in the work we do in consulting and coaching and leadership development.
Mhm.
And it is a real hunger, as you said, or a thirst for authenticity, for the desire to really experience connection and depth and caring in a work environment. And there was a piece in your book, many pieces, but the one I'm focusing on is you approached, for example, strategy in a very different way from a business standpoint. Um, that it was, much more connected to how are you going to go serve, people, and how are you going to really be impacting your customer versus some kind of a high level business strategy that often doesn't even involve people in a meaningful way. Uh, how's, you know, how is that working with your clients, and how is it helping them to both grow their business, but also have the richness that it appears that they're hungering for?
Yeah, I was just having a conversation with a client earlier today about strategy. Is that, strategy, one of the ways that I look at strategy, it's a big word and it covers a lot of ground, but one of the ways that I look at strategy is a way to interpret what is like. It's not a way to impose our will on the universe or on the world. Like, I'm going to make it happen this way, which I think is an exhausting, kind of useless exercise. Um, and when it is successful from that point of view, it creates devastation in a lot of different ways. But what strategy can do is it can help us interpret what is happening, what we're witnessing. It gives us a way of organizing and seeing what we're understanding. A lot of times we're working with clients to help them access guidance, access their heart, their intuition. And, one of the things that one of the examples I like to use, I used to be a paramedic in a former career. And so I have some medical training. And so when I think about a surgeon, somebody who's a highly trained surgeon, if they have a highly developed sense of intuition, they're probably going to be a tremendous surgeon because they're going to be able to make use of all that knowledge. But if all you have is a highly developed sense of intuition, please stay away from me with the scalpel. It's like that's not going to work. When you have knowledge about your business, knowledge about the marketplace, knowledge about your clients, knowledge about what you care about, like a deep sense of who you are and how you want to move in the world, and then you have a sense of intuition. That intuition then can guide you through all of this rather than trying to make random decisions or trying to chase the money or trying to force things to happen. Instead, it gives you a way to interpret and understand what it is that, those little whispers that one gets in the heart that a lot of people brush aside. But when you start to listen to them, you're like, oh, maybe maybe there's a path unfolding here that I can follow.
Well, thank you for that. And similarly, I was fascinated by your unique take on marketing. And I
Mm,
think it showed up in some of the questions you listed, and I'm sure it's in your book as well. But your provocative comment was that marketing is not about attraction.
mm.
So that's a pretty controversial proclamation. So if it's not about attraction, what is it about?
Yes. Thank you for setting that up for me. Um, so because we work with small businesses, a lot of, not entirely, but mostly been our focus. One of their biggest trip ups has been marketing and sales. And what happens is that every time they try to create marketing that pulls people in, that is attractive, a lot of times people will describe this feeling of like, like it doesn't feel good. It feels kind of gross. Like I'm trying to get someone. I'm like a carnival barker or something. And it's like, come here, get some, let me see. It's like, and then when you go to create marketing, there's this pressure of like, if I don't do it right, then I'm not going to get what I need. And it feels terrible. And the insight that I had is that attraction is the realm of love. It's the realm of the heart. Attraction is that. And whenever you try to manufacture love is when it feels terrible. Like you can't manufacture love. You can receive it, you can express it, you can fill with it, but you can't manufacture it. However, in this world of ours, attraction, love, we've all been hurt. We've been hurt by bad marketing. We've been hurt by sleaze. We've been hurt in our personal relationships. And so people are cautious, rightfully so, justifiably so. And so if you're bringing love and care in your business and you're wanting to care for people, what you're wanting to communicate is not attraction, because that's the love. What you're wanting to communicate, and this is what you were asking, is safety. You want people to feel safe enough to slow down, to see if they resonate, to see if the love, the care that you're offering actually is something that is relevant for them, that is something that they're needing. And when we teach this to our clients about how to bring safety into marketing, there's this like huge relief that rises off of them, and they are then able to follow through with their marketing in a really powerful, effective way. And and the marketing feels better. It feels better not only to create it, but also to receive it.
Yeah, it's you're reminding me as you're talking about this. I've recited his name to numerous people. I had a mentor named Kelly Kellerstrass. What a great name. He was this uh, guy who was a master salesperson. And he offered me mentoring when I was in one of my first sales jobs, and nobody else would take it. And I figured, hey, this guy must know something. We go out to the first client, and he stops me before we go in the door, and he says, now, what I want you to remember is we're here to serve. We're here to go find out what they need and see if we can help them get that in a good way. Now, if we find out that what they need isn't something we have, we're going to point them to who has it, because that's serving. And he said, we're here basically to love our clients. And if we
Mm,
can serve them, great. And if we can't, we'll point them to who can. And I
that's
thought,
beautiful.
wow, yeah, it was a wonderful introduction to outside sales.
Yeah. And that's exactly it. And that kind of attitude is so healthy and beautiful. And it creates, when you go in with that kind of attitude, the way that you're talking, the way that you're relating to someone is going to communicate trust. It's going to create connection. And it's also going to feel good because you're not trying to get somebody to do something. So often marketing, when it's not, when it's coming from trying to be attractive or create attraction or sales, is because you're trying to make someone do a particular thing. And whenever you're trying to force or get someone to do a thing that you want them to do, I mean, I mean, I don't know about you, but if I ever try to do that to my wife or my kids, like that's a losing proposition.
Right.
And even if I get it, it feels terrible, you know. And but to come in vulnerably with love, I mean, I'm going to end up just repeating exactly what you said, from this desire to serve and desire to care for people. I mean, that's beautiful. I mean, the one of the things when I was first starting to teach sales, there were two things. One is I'm like, how did I end up being good at sales? Like, that's not in my background. But because I had been a paramedic for 8 years, and I had been um, trained in the art of rapid assessments while caring for people in very chaotic, scary environments, that's sales. It's like, oh wow, I found this and this and this, and this is what I'd like to do, and let's do that. And they're like, yeah, let's get taken care of.
Just a real quick aside, I've never thought of sales and being a paramedic as being connected, but I get the I get the metaphor now in a whole
Right.
new way.
Now I remember the other piece. The other piece is when I first started like working with clients one-on-one, and then started to kind of create a body of work around how do you teach selling, which we call sacred selling, which I discovered that the original word, like the verb to sell, is from the Old English selgen. I'm sure I'm pronouncing it wrong, because I don't speak Old English. But it came from the original meaning to give something to someone freely in response to a request. Like, that's the
Wow.
heart of where the word sell comes from. Like, hey, can I have that pen? Sure, here's this pen. Like, that's to sell. And that's exactly what your mentor was doing. And And that's, that's the heart of it. Just like, how can we care for one another? How can we
Well,
care for one another?
I love that, Mark. And it echoes back to what you were saying about safety and also about caution, and that we're cautious. And I think, especially these days, we've been overwhelmed with these free offers that we know lead to some major upsell. And we're lured into a space where there is a manufacturing of false love. We
Yes.
care about you, even though you're a stranger. We care about you so much. We're giving you this free, but really there's a lot of strings attached to that. And you scroll down 35 pages to get to the $97 offer.
Right.
So, and it's money. People want money. And you write about that too. And you said that there's wisdom in our money struggles. I'd love to hear a little more about that because, Chris's example, that'd be horrifying to some people that you're going to give business away instead of trying to keep it to yourself. You're going to lose money. Share a little bit of your perspective on that kind of generosity.
I, there's kind of two questions in that. One is the wisdom that's in our challenges with money or with business. It's kind of, you know, I started the book out with this statement that if you have issues with business, those are legitimate. Like I don't want anybody to get over their issues with business. And similarly, I don't want them, I say this to clients all the time, new clients coming in. Like if you have reactions or upset or, bad opinions about business or about dealing with money, those are legitimate. There's a great deal of injustice and pain and struggle baked into our economy, baked into our marketplace. Um, the advent of modern capitalism over the last few hundred years has been terrible, toxic for our planet. And commerce and trade has existed in humanity in many different forms for millennia, but these last few hundred years, not so good, not such a good system. And and so when we have resistance to something, we need to listen to that. We don't want to just turn away from something, like if we have resistance and go, ugh, blah, I don't want it anymore. But we also don't want to try to push past it and say, oh, it's just on me. I'm just having a personal reaction. This is really fine. When we have reactions, and this is from the healing work that I do, we want to listen to them because the healing is in the details. We might say, okay, I've had some terrible experiences in sales. I don't want to do it that way. And so I have this natural, healthy reaction against sales. And that's saving us from breaking our ethics, breaking our morals, breaking our heart, doing harm to someone else, doing harm to ourselves. Those are all really healthy responses. But what we want to do is then lean into the discomfort. One of the things I like to say is one of the most important capacities we can develop as a human being is the ability to be with emotional discomfort without trying to soothe it or fix it. And I'm not talking about being in a harmful situation or putting up with abuse or being truly harmed. I'm talking about this kind of emotional discomfort that rises up when we're facing something that is just, that we have one of these kinds of reactions to. And so when we lean in, we begin to wonder, we begin to ask that question, is love available even here? Is there
Mm.
love in sales? And hopefully what we can discover is either, oh, I have a sense that there might be, but I don't know how. So let me keep looking. Or we might stumble across someone like your mentor um, in sales, or any, some heart-centered approach going, oh, I knew there was a way that felt good. I remember teaching our approach to sales to someone, and they went and had a sales conversation, and they had their response from their client. Their client said, oh my God, this is the first time I've ever actually enjoyed being in a sales conversation with someone, because they weren't trying to force them to do something. They weren't trying to get an answer. They were trying to do an honest assessment and be in service. And And it's so much more pleasant. And so when we have these kinds of reactions, and this comes up around money too, comes up around, there's so many different topics in business that have emotional content, that have spiritual content, that have content where we have reactions. We have to listen to those, but we don't want to just take the surface reaction and turn away. We want to lean in, because it's up to all of us to discover, where is the love. We have to start weaving a much healthier way to be with each other. And we are, thankfully.
Yeah, that's as you're saying that, it reminds me of something else you talk about in your book. And that is the whole process of, this lean into the discomfort, but also the wisdom of understanding where you are in the development process.
Mhm.
Because the development process itself is uncomfortable at times, but also being able to not try to get to third base before you've even crossed first base. And even at the end of your book, you lay out some steps repeatedly based on different phases of where you are in your process. And I thought that was so brilliant. So maybe you could share a little bit more about the wisdom of understanding the development process itself and where you might be in it if you're a business
Yeah,
person.
yeah. It's really important. A lot of people come to us because, if you go get an MBA, it doesn't really apply to small business. It only the vast majority of MBA learning applies to the larger corporate structures. And so a lot of people come to us having already tried to make their business work, and they put different things in place in kind of a patchwork fashion, which is totally legit. That's how you do things often. And they say, my business is broken. It's not working. And what I always like to do is help them reshift towards this developmental approach, saying, your business isn't broken, it's just not developed. I mentioned, I have twin sons, 15 years old, and they are really good at cleaning the house by now. I've trained them really well, not sending boys out into the world who can't clean. And, and they vacuum the house and they dust, and it's like they do the dishes, and it's like, sometimes you have to push them. They are teenagers, but they do it. When they do it, it's really good. But when they were 6, no, no, they weren't even tall enough to operate the vacuum cleaner. So um, I like our clients to see, you may have been in business for 15 years. I was just reading over an assessment from one of our clients, one of our new clients recently. You may have been in business for 15 years, but because no one told you to look at your business developmentally, you haven't actually developed your business. You've developed your skills. You're really good at what you do, but your business is effectively operating in the first stage of development. And you just need to start focusing on these developmental pieces. Now, that reframe in and of itself brings a tremendous amount of relief, going, oh yeah, there's nothing wrong with my business. It just needs to develop, and I just need to focus on developing it. But what it also does is that when we think about stages of development, we don't focus on the wrong thing at the wrong time. There's such a long list. I have this really long list of all the things you want to put in place to get into a fully developed business. But if you try to do them all at once, or even in like 6 months, overwhelm, complete overwhelm. But if you know what stage you're in, you can say, okay, I can set all of this aside. I don't need fancy branding. I don't need a super expensive website. I don't need like sophisticated, social media advertising. I need to focus on these fundamentals in the first stage, around who am I trying to reach, and how do we handle sales in a heart-centered fashion? And what is it that we're selling, and how do we ask for referrals, and how, just get these very basic things down. And then you start to gain traction, and then you can start to move on to the second. And that's something that can actually be handled. Like, you can actually get your arms around it. And again, the relief. Our culture so wants us to work 24 hours a day, wants us to be like these production machines and not enjoy life. And that is not that is not the way to live. And so what I try to do is kind of like let's bring in kindness. Let's bring in compassion. Let's slow things down. And by slowing things down, you actually move more quickly, because people who try to rush through all of this, trying to punch it through and make it happen, one, end up multiplying early mistakes into big messes, and then often end up having to undo a lot, and redoing it differently. And they get into tangles, and they can often get into debt and get um, into a place where they're really drowning in their business, instead of, all right, okay, I've been at business for a while, but I can be humble and focus on this first stage and start to get traction and start to feel like I actually know how this works and how clients are coming in and how to grow it. It's really fabulous. My heart was always happy when I see someone start to get traction because they've managed to focus on the basics like that.
You're reminding me of one of the paradoxes I listed in a book I just wrote this last year. Why is there always enough time to do things over, but never enough time to do them right the first time?
No.
Right? If you're talking about rushing through things, not developing at a steady pace, but you're also talking about obsession, right?
Mm,
And just being obsessed with getting results and pushing, pushing, pushing. I love that you use the term thriving. That's, in our business name. Thriving is, I think of nature. I'm in Maui. We live here part of the year, and, just look behind me. Everything's thriving. Well, it's not obsessed. Nature isn't going 24/7 full tilt. There's this thing called night. There's this thing
right.
called winter, even here. So you mentioned somewhere I read about 3 insights you have on developing a thriving business. And I was curious because as a writer, I'm always sugaring things down into 4 things, 5 things, the 6-part formula. I'm curious about what are these 3 insights, and how did you concentrate down into 3? Because that's simplifying.
So when I think about a thriving business, see, there's a lot of different angles you can come at this from. It's a complex enough creature that you don't, there's not just one frame. But when I think about what we were talking about in terms of productivity, there are, like, the insights that came in have to do with the different kinds of projects that a business is made up of. And when we think about projects and we think about getting things done and building a business, one of the projects, the one that everyone is familiar with, is the project where you're actually getting things done, where you're actually being productive. It's like, okay, I got this done, and I needed to, like, build this sales page for the website, or I needed to build this workflow, or we needed to create this delegation system, or whatever it is. It's like, oh, and I got something done. However, that's not the only kind of project. There's also a project that I call a learning project, where you're not trying to create a production, you're not trying to have something productive at the end of it. You're trying to learn about something. Maybe there's a new platform or application your business is starting to use, or maybe you're taking on a different kind of structure. Like, it's, instead of having 1 or 2 employees, you've jumped to having a handful of employees or more. And how are you learning about how to manage people? Are you learning about how to delegate? Are you learning but you're not actually delegating, you're learning. Sometimes our clients want to step into doing social media um, in a way that works for their business. And I always say, well, why don't you just spend time in social media learning how to interact with people in a healthy way before trying to make it, and we give guidelines around that, before trying to actually get sales or get business from it. And so by having space to learn, then you can then move into something productive, but it takes time. Similarly, another kind of project is a project around gathering help, gathering resources. When we had an employee who was with us for several years, and then she was marvelous, and then she wanted to move on. She wanted to partially retire and and move on. And so we had to hire a new person who we hired a little over a year ago. There was a whole process. Of course, everybody's familiar with the hiring process, who's, not everyone, but it's a familiar process. But it's like that is like a big project to hire someone, but we're not being productive. It's not, quote unquote, moving the business forward. We're learning about, okay, are there ways that we need to change the job description? Are there different things that we need from our business rather than just replacing the person we got? Like, there's all of this gathering resources and then doing the hiring and the interviewing and then actually onboarding them that is not, quote unquote, productive for the business, but it's gathering resources. If we don't make space, if we don't have a really relaxed, open-hearted way to deal with these different types of projects, then we do get caught in this running all the time, and we don't, the business can't grow. We feel like we're on a treadmill instead of the business actually developing.
Yeah, those are great, and I think making those distinctions is really helpful. We've got about, well, let's say 6 or 7 minutes left, so I'm giving Will a chance to think of the most brilliant question. While
Hopefully not another one that I gaff. What did I write? Who wrote this?
I think actually where that question was leading to is in your chapter about the 10 elements of a thriving business. I think that's where that was coming from.
Oh, right.
The I want to mention the name of the book is Heart-Centered Business, correct?
Yes.
And it's available on Amazon in both paperback and Kindle.
Yes.
I've been promoting the Kindle version because I know people can do it instantly, but the paperback's good too for those who love books. And so, as I just want to encourage our listeners and our viewers to really check this out and dive in, because it is such a novel approach to business that, again, is on one hand very heart-centered, very focused on love, and yet at the same time brilliantly pragmatic, practical, and super helpful. So that's my plug. And I'll now turn it over to Will to ask that penetrating question.
I'd go back to, Mark, what you were just saying so brilliantly about business and the value of a learning space, which may not seem productive immediately, and to encourage our viewers and listeners to get your book and enter into a learning space with it, and to not expect they read 5 pages and then contact you on the website and hire you, etc. They may down the road do that, but to really embrace this concept of a learning space and soak in it and not be impatient to get productive, but to really feel that, really let it change them, change their perspective. So in that vein, I'd love you to gift us here with a little journey as we complete the call. Without vision, there's not much. We just flail around. I'd love you to go ahead in time, like 5 years, 10 years, whatever you choose, and imagine a world where business is functioning from the heart-centered space, where the principles that you espouse, the things that we teach, are reality in many businesses. What is the business world like in this future that you and we are contributing towards? The heart-centered business. Just share a little bit of your vision as if it's an accomplished reality. I'd love to hear
Yeah,
it.
that's very interesting. So I think for me, the first thing in laying out that vision is that business would not take up anywhere near as much space as it does now. It would be a much smaller proportion. There would be so much more that happens in our lives that isn't transactional, that isn't commercial, that doesn't have to do with an exchange of money for services or products. There's thriving small communities where people are happy to do childcare and support each other, where education, a lot of education is free, where there's a lot of mutual aid and support. Just, and that there's a place for So much. I mean, I don't think there's just one way this would look. It's like, I think also another aspect is that each region all over the globe, as used to be the case, would develop something that was uniquely suited for their own environment, that and their own culture, and it was like, specific to that. I think that businesses would also be smaller in scale so that they were embedded in communities and they were accountable to those communities rather than having so much power that they had power over the communities. They formed a part of it, not a controlling interest. And I also would like to think that because of the tremendous resources that are available to us that are currently being hoarded by just a few, that those resources would be spread around way better. We know that France went to a 30-hour work week some years ago with no loss of productivity. It's common knowledge, from so many studies, even though people aren't paying attention to it, that 40 hours a week or more, like you can't be productive all 40 hours, that people are fully employed 20, 25, maybe 30 hours a week. And there's so much more space for community living and for care. And because wealth and resources aren't being hoarded at the top, making just a few people fabulously wealthy, there's plenty of resources to support that kind of vision. Like, we don't have to, there's enough to go around.
Yeah, and I chuckled because I just for a moment thought that the overachiever is now working 30 hours a week.
Right.
And
Right.
that was a good reframe. Well, I love that vision, and I love kind of one of your initial questions that we certainly focus on, but the way you said it, I think, is really, really powerful. Is love found here? Can I find love here? With the assumption, and this was the context behind it that was so powerful, that it is there. Of course it's there. I just need to find it. I don't have to bring it in. It's already there. And so it's just for me and others for us to step into that space and say, how can we find this together? Mm-hmm. So again, thank you so much, Mark. Great read. Love, the conversation we've had here today as well.
Yeah.
I'm so grateful for, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I just wanted to echo that. Thanks so much. And I think I speak for many of our viewers and listeners in saying, I want what you're having.
We're all so dependent on each other, all of our gifts. And the more that we can, each of us, be freed up through love, the more we can all benefit. If any one of us is missing, then we're not whole. There's the oneness is not present. So
beautiful. Well, thank you. Wishing you so much success as you continue to do the brilliant work you're doing.
Thank you. And thank you for hosting me.
Yeah, you're welcome.